Live. Hi, you guys. I'm Angela Hughes. I'm usually on here talking about luxury travel, but today I wanted to bring on my good friend and colleague, Lindsey Munns, who this month is Fetal Alcohol Awareness Month. That's right. And so I'm bringing her on just to raise awareness today about just a really important issue that I really just didn't even know that much about until I met her, and I met the struggle that she has raising her kids who are both victims of fetal alcohol syndrome. So first of all, Lindsey, let me just, she's got an amazing background. So let me tell you guys just a little bit about this. She graduated from the University of Utah in Community and Consumer Studies, and then continued to get her master's degree in education. And she worked in the healthcare industry for 10 years before she became a flight attendant. And then she married her amazing husband, who's a lawyer here in Orlando, and they've been raising 4 kids here, 2 of which are adopted. And as soon as she found out she was adopting them, surprise, she was pregnant. So after years of infertility, she ended up almost having triplets at the same time, 1 biological and then 2 through adoption. And then she had a baby, a year or 2 later. So now you've got 4 kids under 5 years old. So welcome, Lindsey Munns. We're broadcasting to a ton of groups out there on Facebook today, just because I think this is such an important topic. So tell us a little bit about how did you even know? I mean, because you didn't know when you were adopting that the kids suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome and so forth. So
yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me on here. And just to clarify, there was no infertility. I have some health issues where they advised not to have pregnancies, but we kind of did anyways, and just happened to get pregnant and matched kind of within a week of each other. And we just thought we'll take whatever God gives us, and we got blessed with all of them. So it's been a fun journey, and definitely an unexpected one, you know, with the alcohol exposure not being known when we adopted our twins. And you know, within the first year of their life, there were things happening symptomatically. Some were more behavioral and some were more physical. And so, you know, we started going to doctors and seeking out advice, and, you know, everyone told us they were fine and not to worry about it. And, you know, as time went by, I, as a mother, did not feel or see that things felt fine. So we kind of just kept at it, and basically had to get really desperate and call on a favor to talk to a doctor beyond our pediatrician. And we had been to several pediatricians, and the wait list to get into developmental pediatricians and you know, pediatric psychiatrists or whatever it is to get an evaluation, it's you know, up to a year for some cases. And so we were really fortunate to get that connection and have someone help us. And we are very fortunate to have an early diagnosis of FASD for our twins. We got one diagnosis.
How important is the early diagnosis? I mean, what does that mean? And what were the first signs that you saw that, you know, things aren't going quite like you expected? And I'm sure with adoptions, you're looking for all sorts of things, just not for this.
Exactly. And, you know, so both of our twins were affected very differently. And I think that surprises a lot of people, that twins would be affected very differently. And that has been our experience. One was more just behaviors, just these intense behaviors as a child, as an infant, that just seemed way more extreme. And, you know, the other twin had chronic ear infections. It seemed sensitive to light and noise, kind of some sensory issues. So they just presented with very different symptoms, whereas one of our twins, you know, early on, it was very apparent. And so he was the first to get a diagnosis at 2.5 years old. And then our second son down the road around 4. But that early diagnosis is key, because we had no idea what we were dealing with. And the treatments and accommodations for alcohol exposure are so different. Like, we were self-paying for behavioral therapy because we just didn't know what else to do. And
so you just thought
ABA therapy.
So you just thought they were having behavior issues and didn't know it was related to the alcohol to start with, is what you're saying?
Yeah. Exactly. And so we started self-paying for those therapies thinking it would help, and we weren't really seeing much progress with that.
Yeah.
And then once you get that diagnosis and you learn that ABA is not a great fit for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, you're like, oh, okay, well, that's why. So there are different treatments and accommodations, knowing that it's alcohol exposure, especially when their symptoms mimic so many other disabilities. And in fact, there are over 400 conditions that follow under the umbrella of FASD. So like ADHD, autism, ODD, RAD, all of these different, seizures, or all these different things that people are being on or miss or partially diagnosed with. And it does make a difference in the treatment. And the way that you accommodate and approach the situation if it is alcohol exposure. And so it's very important, and we feel very lucky to have had that early diagnosis, because otherwise, as a parent, you're just probably pulling your hair out, because if you don't know what's going on, you just think you have these really misbehaved children and you're just a terrible parent. You can't control this or that. You've read every parenting book that they've suggested and it's still not working. It is very important, and it's important for their education, for teachers to be able to know how to accommodate that properly, instead of just, mislabeling them as someone who just doesn't want to learn, or they're a bad kid, or things like that can kind of create some secondary and tertiary situations where there's self-esteem issues, and, they start acting out when they can't meet the demands of society. That, we say that we have 10-second kiddos living in a 1-second world. They just need a little more time and accommodation. And knowing that has made just such a difference, even just in school, by being able to educate their teachers and the schools and things like that.
So would you say that a lot of kids probably are misdiagnosed as this ADD?
Hold on, Angela.
Okay.
Are you there? Okay.
Yeah,
I think that mine was getting some kickback in my earphones, so I'm just going to take them off.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, do you feel like a lot of, I mean, you kind of mentioned that a lot of kids get diagnosed as ADD or assessed as compulsive or something, when really they might be dealing with fetal alcohol syndrome if you looked back at the past of the mother, and we lump it into like these other behavior things. I mean, that's hard.
I don't want to say that like everyone that has one of those other diagnoses, for sure was exposed to alcohol, because that's absolutely not the case. Okay. But yes, oftentimes that is part of, the FASD umbrella diagnosis of what's going on. And so if you're seeing these behaviors and you think any of this sounds like something your children are going through, then you might want to look back to see if there's more pieces of the puzzle that we just haven't figured out.
Let's go back to like just early pregnancy because I mean, I think this would be really impactful, like for young college students who are drinking and might be pregnant. I mean, how I have never even thought about this, to be honest. And I don't until we started talking about it. And so how important is it for just college girls who might be out and then sleep with their boyfriend and find out they're pregnant and have been drinking? I mean, how early does it start impacting them? That early, or?
Yep. I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's so many misconceptions out there that, you can drink until it's pink, or, the first couple weeks of pregnancy don't matter, but that is absolutely false. Those first 4 to 6 weeks are when the central nervous system starts forming. So it's very, very important to not be drinking. In fact, the time to stop drinking during pregnancy is not when you get that positive pregnancy test, but it's when you're trying to conceive, because it can affect it from the get-go. And there are a lot of unplanned pregnancies. 50 to 60% of pregnancies are unplanned.
Wow.
This is not a socio-demographic, specific disability. I think there's a lot of stigma and shame around this. A lot of unawareness and miseducation. And so that's something we really want to get out there and break down the stigma, and that this happens to everyone. In fact, statistically, college educated women have the most FASD born children. And
really? Okay.
And to touch on that, 80% are or misdiagnosed. So 1 in 20 school age children have an FASD. and only 20% of those know about it. So can you imagine what our teachers are dealing with, what our parents are dealing with, what our poor children that are on the spectrum must be dealing with, because they're the ones who have it the hardest. They're living in a world that's not accommodating and then maybe disciplining them for things they can't control. So it's very important to, use the proper protections so that unplanned pregnancies aren't exposed to alcohol. But we do know that unplanned pregnancies happen, and there are things that can be done. There are studies showing that the supplement of choline during pregnancy, as well as in the first 5 years of an infant's or child's life, can help kind of restore some of the damage done. And I, don't think that you can drink and then just take choline, because that's not what I'm saying. But it is important to talk to your doctor if you've had an unplanned pregnancy and there has been alcohol consumption, because it absolutely can have a great effect on the fetus even early on.
Okay, real quick, if you're watching, and it may only look like 15 people are watching on this feed, but this is being streamed out to over 50 Facebook groups today. And some of those groups have tens of thousands of people in them. And so if you're watching and you want to leave a comment, please do so. You don't even have to go out to StreamYard and leave your name like it says. You can just put a comment and we'll go ahead and answer those for you. And the power is in the replay of this, because it is being broadcast live. It'll be replaying just forever on Facebook. And so show your friends and neighbors. But okay, so one of the things that I just want to talk about is how come people don't know more about this?
Oh, so many reasons. And we have the same questions as parents and caregivers and advocates too. There's been polls done, medical students, behavioral therapists, occupational therapists, speech pathologists, psychiatrists, psychologists. If you poll them and ask them if they received training in fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, most of them will say no, or like just the basic definition. And these are the providers who treat our kiddos or people on the spectrum, and they have not been trained or taught about it in depth. So that is something that we are working on to get changed and advocate with. And we're super excited that Orlando Health and Arnold Palmer Hospital this year has taken notice of the issue, and they're going to try to start helping us out there. And so they're going to receive some trainings by webinar, which is amazing. So the doctors, first and foremost, haven't been educated properly in their curriculums. We still have doctors telling women it's okay to drink during pregnancy occasionally. And I'm like,
that too, like it's okay. I mean, how about even like caffeine exposure?
Yeah, I mean, caffeine, we all know, is not great for a fetus either. I obviously haven't been studying for the last 2 years the effects of caffeine. So, but any substance is, we know there are a lot of things we have to stay away from when we're pregnant as women. But I should point out too that I think the most surprising thing to me and to a lot of people is that alcohol is the worst substance you could expose your fetus to, over heroin, over cocaine, over any illegal narcotic out there. We focus on this opioid crisis, and like those all have negative effects on a fetus as well. But alcohol causes the most and long-term damage for a fetus. And it's unfortunate because it's a legal substance and it's so socially accepted and culturally part of every culture, it seems like. I think it's just not looked at maybe as negatively as drugs, but it has the most long-term damage for a fetus. It's essentially developmental brain damage,
right?
A developmental brain injury, and you can't recover from that. I mean,
so let's talk about. You might suspect, you're a mom now, either young or older. You might suspect that my child might have this, just even from watching our little PSA today. What would be the steps that somebody would take to like move the ball down the court to? Because you said it took a while. You just couldn't get your pediatrician to sign off on this. So what would the steps be for somebody who wanted to investigate this further?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would send you to some websites that I think are really great with great statistics and information. Proofalliance.org is a really great one.
Okay.
There is NoFast, which is the America's, nonprofit organization. They are working on getting things going and a little more updated. if you live in Florida, the floridacenter.org, that's where we took our boys for a diagnosis, and it is free to the residents of Florida.
Yeah.
And they are a wealth of information, and their website is a wealth of information as well. It is a multidisciplinary diagnosis approach. So it takes multiple specialties to kind of rule other things out, and, several different kinds of evaluations from different providers to make that diagnosis. If you have confirmed alcohol exposure, you're going to have a much easier time to getting that diagnosis, because having that confirmed exposure, whether you're saying, oh, I did drink before I found out I was pregnant, or, there's, people that have addiction problems, which is a disease. And I want to make clear that, like, we all know that there's not a mother out there that would intentionally harm her child. So
yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because I'm sure there's some guilt associated with, got dropped my iPad there. Yeah, I'm sure there's some guilt associated when you find out that your child might be suffering from this. You could have made clearer choices. There was a comment that just came up that said many women get pregnant having alcohol in their system, which we kind of just discussed. And so how can women, first of all, deal with it, but then also deal with the guilt that might accompany that?
Yeah.
Yours came through adoption, so you didn't have a lot of
exactly. Yeah. And we have an open adoption with our birth mom. And so obviously her and I have had these conversations. I've had other conversations with other amazing biological moms who have children on the spectrum. And I think that you have to allow yourself to grieve. And there's a lot of grieving, whether you're a biological parent, an adopted parent, or a foster parent. There is a lot of grieving involved with FASD, to kind of just realize what's happening and how life might have to look a little differently, and success looks differently. But my advice, is to just not beat yourself up, because that's how we're going to stop and end this stigma and shame. And that's how we're going to make real change. And it's not, we've all been misinformed and undereducated on this, even the medical professionals. So how or why should a biological mother who drank, take blame for that when we didn't know? It's kind of like, we know better now, we're going to do better. And, let's focus on getting the accommodations, because there's so much hope and help out there if you know what you're dealing with, and it literally can change your world. Before we knew what we were dealing with, life was really hard and scary. I'm not going to lie. And we still have challenges, but now that we know how to accommodate, there's a book called Trying Differently Rather Than Harder by Diane Mablin. And I highly recommend that book, because it's all about just kind of shifting your parenting focus, and it's not traditional, and might be a lot of judgment that comes with it. But really the goal here, aside from any shame and guilt that might be there, is to help our kiddos, right? To help the kiddos that are suffering with this. And that needs to be first and foremost above.
And that's really why we're doing the show today, is to raise awareness, to get the message out there that be cautious about what you're doing prior to being pregnant, and just day-to-day life, with drinking, and then the things to look for. Tell us, I know that your life is pretty wild, especially at 2 a.m. Tell us real quick, like, what a regular night looks for a kid with FASD.
Well, and you'll hear this a lot. If you know one child with FASD, you know one child with FASD. We happen to know two. But no, it's a spectrum, just like autism. So the symptoms can be anywhere from mild to severe. So unfortunately, with FASD, it's very common for them to have sleep issues and sleep problems. And it's because their cortisol levels are all mixed up. And so we went for a good 1.5 years with no solid nights of sleep, where 2 or 3 hours of sleep at most were what we were getting out of one of our sons. And then someone else would pop up, or
and let's not forget that she had 3 so almost like triplets.
Oh, honestly, their sleeping habits as infants were way better. I would take 3 newborns again over 3 5-year-olds, because their sleep, it wasn't always an issue until it was, and it was easier having 3 newborns. But we have had nights and days and stretches of time where we've gone 36, 72 hours without an ounce of sleep, and they're bouncing off the walls. They're Energizer bunnies. And I'm like, how. I mean, and I'm talking, we even resulted, last resort to medication, and that doesn't even shut it down. So like medication that would shut me down if I took it is not shutting the FASD brain down. So
yeah, you're like, maybe mom should be medicated versus the kid at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, sleep deprivation is high on the list at our house, but we have made some improvements by, trying some different things and making different accommodations to see what works. And we're getting at least 3 or 4 nights of sleep a week now. So we're very happy about that.
I think this is really interesting. And you taught me this, that FASD can actually cause different facial features. I had never heard that. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. I think that a lot of people are really more familiar with fetal alcohol syndrome, FAS, which is the furthest end of the spectrum of FASD. It's like the most severe, kind of where everything.
I didn't even know that. I'm just throwing out like acronyms, hoping.
Yeah, and that's it's fine. A lot of people, unless you've been studying it, But FAS was what was discovered back in the 70s, that alcohol does in fact put the fetus at risk. And you'll see this misconception of these facial features that will sometimes, when you Google fetal alcohol syndrome, and there are different facial features, and it has to do with the bridge of their nose, a thin upper lip, the vermilion is flat, the measurements of the eyes are a certain diameter apart or too close together. I don't have it right in front of me, but only about 5 to 10% of people on the spectrum have those facial features. So that, I think, I'm so glad you brought this up, because this, for most, is a very invisible disability. People are walking around looking completely normal, sounding completely normal. And then when they have these symptoms come out of them, without any facial markers, you don't realize you're dealing with someone with a disability. And so we have a long way to go with disability rights, because right now in some states, in a lot of states, only full fetal alcohol syndrome is considered a disability, and anything short of that full diagnosis is not considered a disability.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's
as far as getting funding and accommodations. And so that's also something we need to fight for, because this is 2.5 more times common than autism, and it receives little to no funding in comparison. And not that we want to take any funding away from autism, right? But point being is it's 28 times more common than Down syndrome. It's the leading developmental disability in the world, and it's receiving little funding, little attention, little awareness, little accommodations. And so that's what we're trying to change, because there's so many people suffering. It's affecting, it cost the US in 2010, they did a study, $5.5 billion. And that's just of what we know. That's not including all the people we don't know that are undiagnosed, because if you study the homeless population, if you study the prison systems, and they get evaluated, oftentimes they unknowingly have FASDs. And when they get older, what happens without knowledge of a diagnosis and the support of family or school, whatever, when they become adults, they have a hard time managing money or holding a job or a relationship, or whatever it is. They, you can see how they could maybe end up turning to some different things that might not be great choices, but they've got intellectual disabilities going on that they've never addressed or been accommodated for. So it's a really unfortunate thing when the diagnosis is not there, because it can just lead to so many things. And without a diagnosis, the average life expectancy, and I remember the first time I heard this in one of our trainings, I had to shut it off, freak out, cry, because the average life expectancy for someone with FASD without supports and a diagnosis is 34.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That is crazy.
And when you learn, I know that's really scary to throw out there, and it is, but that, the leading causes of that are suicide, drug abuse, homelessness, secondary, tertiary conditions that arise from things being unaddressed or handled or mishandled. So we're really there's so many people out there that, we want to get the right help and accommodations for.
Okay, we have a few more minutes, but again, if you have questions for Lindsey, put them in the comments. We'll flash them up on the screen. We want to answer those. Real quick, what advice do you have for moms that are struggling with this?
Find a support group. There are plenty online. because you don't get it until you've lived it. I mean, I can sit here and tell you about it all day, and you are not going to understand it until you live it. And the great thing is there's a great community out there of other moms and parents and dads even that are, my husband's advocating as well in different ways. And finding that support and finding what works for people or what has worked for other people, or having those brainstorming ideas where, hey, have you tried this? They're crazy suggestions, like locking up your fridge for one, because they can't fill when they're full. And that's one of the things. So there's just all these great people out there willing to help each other. And I have found such great support in that. So I would recommend finding a local support group, or even actually mine aren't even all local. They're online on Facebook. And that's so great that we have all this technology now to where I can get that support. And it's life-changing to have others who understand what you're going through and that can kind of guide you to providers and programs and therapies that will really help your situation or whatever it is.
Real quick, and this is going to sound really uneducated, but do they ever grow out of it, improve with,
Yeah. So that is why, the early diagnosis is so beneficial, is because, we know that the brain has some neuroplasticity to it. And so certain therapies that are recommended for FASD and things like that, occupational therapy, speech therapy, if it's needed, physical therapy, play therapy, there's all these things. And the more we can, instill that into someone's brain before puberty hits, because puberty is hard for everyone, but it's especially hard for those with FASD because those surge of hormones come in, and it's a lot harder to deal with a teenager.
Right.
With FASD if you haven't started younger. And so that's another reason it's good to have that early diagnosis. But there does seem to be a catch-up period, because often people on the spectrum are dysmature, so that we like to say they're half their age. So if my children are approaching 6-year-olds, when they're struggling, they're more like 3-year-olds. And I see that, and I absolutely see that. So they're saying, if you can hang in to 30, 35, then they're more like a 16, 17-year-old type thing. And that's a lot easier to kind of reason and deal with. And so there are many people on the spectrum that are very, very successful. This is not a disability that's crippling to everyone. There are professionals that are very successful that have this. And Barbara Bush mentioned in George Bush's funeral that, it wasn't his fault I drank when he was pregnant, as a joke, which wasn't funny to us in the FASD community. But my point being is I don't want moms to lose hope that their children's lives are ruined because they're not. These children are amazing. They have so many talents and strengths because their brains do work differently. I mean, my 2-year-old could turn on Netflix and pick out a show and work the remote better than I could. They're just very smart. And I think that's one of the hard things with FASD is often their IQs can be really high, but their executive functioning levels are lower.
Yeah.
There is a time where people often, are able to function a lot better with the right accommodations and supports as they grow up.
Okay. 2 more questions. How have you grown as a mom throughout all of this?
Motherhood has been such a different journey than I ever envisioned, but it has been so much more fulfilling in such a hard way.
Yeah.
The compassion and the understanding that I've gained for just even others, by experiencing our own challenges, has just been so humbling. And it's been hard to release the judgments, because our parenting is different, and what might look like helicopter parenting or spoiling or not disciplining to someone, I've had to really overcome those judgments, because if we're in a store and my child, I can tell he's about to have a meltdown. I mean, am I going to buy him the candy bar even though he's acting a certain way? And I do, and I get comments all the time. I would never do that if my child was doing this. And it's well, you also don't know what will happen if I don't accommodate this. So we kind of have to pick our battles, and that,
Well, I even have that problem without that. so
it just, I've had to really just throw out all the judgments and just, I had to really overcome I'm a stay-at-home mom. So like I never envisioned needing to have hired help because I'm working outside the home. And that was really hard for me to admit that I needed that help. So it's been, hard and challenging for me, but it's like made me appreciate what my children bring to this earth and what they're here and what they can accomplish and what they've taught me and what they're teaching others. And it's just, it's one of those things. Nobody's motherhood or parenthood journey goes the way you think it's going to go. But it's a beautiful journey. And I feel so honored and blessed that God would trust us with these two beautiful souls.
Yeah. And you guys have done such a great job. It's been really inspiring. Even I've been following the journey and just really impressed with just everything that you're doing. So let's end with this question. I know that you guys are advocating a lot on a local and a national level. What does that look like right now? And where are you at with that?
Yeah, so we've got so many great things going on. And thanks to one of the silver linings of COVID, like a lot of these trainings for FASD that weren't available unless you traveled and paid to go to them are now available by Zoom or webinars like this. And so it's like been amazing. So we have worked with the Florida Center and volunteering with them to kind of help get organizations trained. We've had the Orange County School Board Special Education Team trained, which is huge because we're like the 9th largest school district in the country, and they had no training or idea about it. And they're dealing with 1 in 20 in the school system. So that we are really proud and excited about that. We've been working with a local state senator who is trying to get funding for FASD on the state level. It went all the way through and got vetoed on Governor DeSantis's desk, unfortunately, but we will be back and fighting even harder this year for that again, because we need that funding for these families and children. Because the FASD clinic here is a nonprofit and they can only diagnose what they have funds. And so that's why there's a year waiting list to get into this clinic unless you self-pay. And so we want to really get that funding out. We've had local schools trained. We've done lots of podcasts. We have an Instagram account at fasd.florida where we're just kind of spreading information. Others can share it, which is a way.
The same model that Lindsey's doing and do it in your own states and in your own communities. You don't need to live in Orange County where we're at. You can move this into your own community and push forward. She was just a mom with a cause and wanted to raise awareness. And it's helping just even on the one thing that she did was, get the teachers trained in our community makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Because now the teachers know what they're working with instead of lumping them into, what they thought they were working with. And so you could be duplicating and copying this. And I'm going to ask Lindsey to put those organizations in the comments after we're done that you guys can go back and take a look at.
Can I say one thing real quick about that? And we've also been working with Orlando Health and getting doctors trained. We have a scholarship coming up, which I'll post more information about for anyone that wants to write an FASD essay and try to get some scholarship money. But if you do want to advocate, reach out to me because they're a group of mama warriors and we are stronger together. And the things that they are all doing are amazing. And so, yes, please reach out and please share and please advocate or ask any questions you have. There's lots more to come to, and we're very excited about it.
I'm here for the kids. So we're going to end with that. I'm Angela Hughes. This was Lindsey Munns. And thanks for taking a look today.
Thanks so much, Angela.
Yeah, and the power's in the replay. So keep watching and posting and sharing. So thanks, everybody. See you later.
Thank you.
Here they come.